thrill it is to be here today to talk about Metal Gear Solid 3. Howdy, I'm Cowboy Chris, and welcome to Game Will Ramble. Mars invited me here today to yak your ear off for a little while about one of my all-time favorite video games and the new coat of paint it just received. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is easily top 5 in the games that had the impact on who I ultimately became as a human being, as a gamer, as a husband, and as a father. Okay, maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, but as we head into this review, just know that I'm very much a fan of the source material here. I've amassed dozens of playthroughs over the years. Many a lazy Saturday afternoon in the long-lost ages of myth some may recall as the aughts was spent on repeat playthroughs of this game, and the end credits song Way to Fall has had a permanent spot on most every favorites playlist I've made since 2004. With a little disclaimer out of the way, consider this review not a question of whether or not you should play Metal Gear Solid 3, because if you have not, you absolutely should, but a question of whether this remake in particular is worth your time and money over playing the original, and if it is the definitive way to experience Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater in 2025. For the uninitiated among you, I will avoid spoilers, but most of my takes will be lost on someone without at least some knowledge of Metal Gear Solid. If you are in this group, you can take comfort in the fact that Mars has endured years of these ramblings without context as well. First and foremost, at its core, Metal Gear Solid Delta is still Metal Gear Solid 3, preserved in most of its original essence as opposed to the full reimaginings we've seen in recent years with the likes of the Resident Evil series and Silent Hill 2. I'd argue that this is for the best. Metal Gear Solid 3 really is one of those lightning-in-a-bottle games with its tight pacing and near-perfect blend of camp and drama, and it could not have been captured again. Even Kojima never achieved this balance again with the follow-up titles. Metal Gear Solid 4's bloated and never-ending cutscenes are a meme for a reason, and Metal Gear Solid 5 still stings a little bit with its top-tier stealth gameplay that was tuned to perfection, only to be largely wasted on vast open spaces of nothingness. Speaking of Metal Gear Solid 5, what we do get here is a modern control layout that, while I can't help but be put off by the term modern, actually fits quite well and brings the game more in line with its now decade-old younger sibling. I'm not enough of a Kojima purist to ever defend the classic Twister-like control layout of hold R1 to look, lightly hold square to ready your weapon, and then hold L2 and R2 to peek up over grass, and then aim with the left joystick. Simplifying it to L2 to aim, peek up with R3, then fire with R2 feels very fluid and natural. Another great addition is the crouch walk, which wasn't introduced until later handheld spin-off titles, and felt like something that was missing from the original all along. It makes opening doors in heavily patrolled areas much less risky, and is particularly useful in areas with trenches or other low-cover objects that used to require standing up in full sight to interact with. We can also swap camouflage on the fly with a quick menu rather than doing so in the pause menu, and that fixes one of the few blemishes on the gameplay pacing of the original. All of these little quality of life features fit right in as if they were always a part of the core experience and do not feel tacked on. The potential downside to them is that it does generally make the game feel too easy. Guards aren't really equipped to deal with Snake's new ability to quickly line up shots while crouch walking at them. I've seen some folks describe the guards as more alert than they were before. While their sightlines certainly feel like they got a buff, they also take much longer to investigate sounds and potential sightings of Snake. The guards in Delta like to do a little suspicion dance before moving forward, whereas in the original they moved briskly towards a potential intruder to not give you those precious extra seconds waiting for a Treg, or her bullet if you prefer, to the head. I suspect they did get a damage boost to make them more competitive, but that's negligible since optimal play involves not giving them a chance to return fire. Bosses get a few boosts as well that only make the battle more difficult if a longer battle equates to additional difficulty. The Pain, the Fear, Vulcan, and the boss all appear to have extra iframes, preventing follow-up shots that were possible in the original. It's more annoying than challenging if you're used to the original fights, but still very manageable with the new control layout. Ironically, the only boss that's easier now is the Fury, who is arguably the most difficult boss in the original. As far as I can tell, they made headshots no longer effective on him, but he is still susceptible to follow-up shots, and the arena is so bright now that it's impossible to lose sight of him. In both of my playthroughs, which were on the extreme difficulty setting, I managed to beat him quickly and without taking damage, a feat that's still rare for me in the original, even with all of my years of experience. Speaking of how bright the Fury's battle arena is, please humor me as I lay out some gripes I have with the typical modern game aesthetic that we get here. Unreal Engine 5 certainly has some nice lighting tech behind it, but the two areas of the game that should be what SpongeBob would have referred to as
advanced darkness,
even on the lowest brightest setting, are easily traversable, making the night vision goggles and the torch completely redundant. I remember my very first playthrough of the original. I ended up in one of these dark areas without either, and the other option for light was either smoking a cigar or firing a gun. As I ran through the well-lit remake cave, I barked off a few rounds from the AK for some extra light. Just for old time's sake, I was astonished to see that this new fancy resource hog of a remake, that also happens to be 6 times the file size of the original, is completely missing muzzle flash effects. A small detail, sure, but a small detail that was included on a PlayStation 2 game 2 decades ago. Then there's the sound design that seems to get softer and less punchy as the years go on. The whooshing sound of the hover platforms are one of those game sounds that have just rung in my head for years and years, and in Delta they're nearly inaudible, as are the landing sounds of grenades. This led to one humorous moment in an area that I knew was patrolled by hover platforms, and was confused by their absence when I noticed one directly above Snake's head, just moments away from triggering an alert. Not a peep was heard besides the guard's typical, "Who was that?" Completing the trifecta of being a modern release on Unreal Engine 5 is a real lack of optimization. I thought that the unskippable Konami splash screen in the original was annoying, but if only younger me knew that one day it would be accompanied by about a minute and a half of shader preloading on launch, made only worse by the game's tendency to crash. I had about 7 such crashes in my first run, about another 5 on the second. I can't think of the original freezing a single time outside of a case of a dying PlayStation 2. So with all that preloading, the next question is, how does it look? Well, as expected, it does look very sharp and detailed. The environments are picturesque and the animals that populate the jungle look amazing. The real standout is the Ent parrot, who's cuter than ever. The environments from the original are still damned impressive for a 2004 title. The new texture work and extra foliage of the jungle is breathtaking. Better still that it does not interfere with the gameplay. Guards are still easily discernible from the background, and it never feels like the scenery is working against the player. Though there is something sterile in the beauty. Remakes and remasters like this generally fail in faithfully translating the original art style. The Metal Gear Solid 3 Pachinko machine had cutscenes that were not perfect, but much closer to matching the aesthetic of the original title. The boss, for example, looks older and tired in both her original incarnation and the patchy slot, but in Delta she just narrowly escapes that truly generic Unreal asset look that we've seen more and more of in recent years. And just about all the characters here have had their faces softened and rounded to the point that without their hair and costumes they'd be unrecognizable. I would have much preferred the boss's beauty mark made the transition to the Unreal Engine remake rather than the focus on seeing every single pore on the character's face. Well, the 7th generation HD collection has been, in my opinion, the definitive way to play Snake Eater to date. A sore spot I've always had with it was the omission of minigames such as the Guy Savage Nightmare sequence, Boss Rush, and Snake vs. Monkey, as well as the abandonment of the original iteration of Metal Gear Online. Reintroducing all of these features would have gone a long way towards allowing Delta to seize the spot as the definitive Metal Gear Solid 3 experience. While we did get Snake vs. Monkey back, and an excellent reimagining of Guy Savage, which had me smiling from ear to ear as the blood moon filled the sky, Boss Rush and Metal Gear Online are still left to gather dust. Metal Gear Online being the more bizarre omission, even though online play is a standard now that does not require an extra console accessory. Internet connectivity is the rule rather than the exception. While I'm grateful that the main game is here in its original glory with neither padding nor cuts, it still feels like it's light on content for a full-price release. Getting some side missions or scenarios akin to the VR missions from Metal Gear Solid or the Snake Tales from Metal Gear Solid 2 would have added some great value and something new for veterans to really dig into. The new Gakko collectibles and the film reels for the Secret Theater are about the only new content we got, and those only go so far past a single playthrough. With that, we find ourselves back to the question I posed at the start. Is Delta worth your time and money? Overall, I say yes, but a $40 price tag would be more appropriate given the lack of new content. And then there's the question of if this is the new definitive way to experience Snake Eater. On that front, I have to say a resounding no. Delta misses the mark on completely surpassing the original release or the HD release. For one, there is some timeless aesthetic value that is lost in the new generic Unreal Engine realism. Bundle that with the added stability of the original releases, and the fact that it's a third of the cost and one-sixth the file size, I'd say that's a pretty good case for sticking with the original over this remaster. Now with that all out of the way, if you'll excuse me, all this Metal Gear Solid 3 excitement has me itching for a replay of Peace Walker, and I think I should get around to starting that. We'll meet again.